All right, this is Infosec number 57, the MAGA edition. So we're starting out with Kaitlyn, who is mining space. Now, I wouldn't think there's anything in space, but
well, you would be quite incorrect about that. So the Daily Star has an article written by Michael Moran talking about how NASA is launching its first space mining company to get moon dust. So the idea is that NASA wants more regolith. That's the actual name of moon dust. To study and figure out how to make things on the moon. Because once you're on the moon, shipping stuff up there is expensive. But if we understand regolith and figure out what we can do with it, and we can start building stuff out of it, and there is a lot of stuff in regolith that's suitable building materials. Regolith is a lot like the Earth's crust, lots of silicates. So, concrete, that kind of stuff. But anyway, NASA wants a bunch of regolith to study, and they've already paid this company a few cents to fly up there, 10 cents actually, a token payment of 10 cents. The company is Lunar Outpost. So Lunar Outpost, NASA's paying Lunar Outpost to go up there and grab moon dust, which, like I said, is a very important material for building, buildings and structures on the moon, as well as a good conductor for aperture science portals.
moon dust.
Moon dust, yes.
That doesn't sound like it's in any way going to be worth flying to the moon to get.
The thing is, you can't fly to the moon and then be like, okay, we got to figure out how to do the moon dust stuff now, like figure out what we can do with it. You got to, a lot of our missions in space is all about figuring out how to do future missions. And this is one of those things, like we're not going to get rich off moon dust. Moon dust does not contain a lot of valuable minerals. There are asteroids out there. They contain a ton of valuable minerals, so much so they would destroy our economy if we ever started mining them. Things like gold, platinum, silver, stuff like that, which is very rare on Earth, could be found in high abundances in certain asteroids. Mm-hmm. The idea here is just to go to the moon, get some samples in large amounts, start mining samples, and bring them back so we can start figuring out cool stuff to do with it.
All right. So, as usual, NASA stuff, I mean, science pretty much for the sake of exploration, not really for an immediate practical benefit.
No. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. All right. And Irvin has got the iPhone stuff.
The iPhone saga continues. 25,000 people signed a petition from the EFF asking Apple not to scan their phones. This is the continuation of the child CSAM thing that's been going on. And Apple finally said that they will delay it. They will delay the scanning on phones. They didn't say when they would do this, but they just said it's going to be delayed.
Yeah, well, it is kind of a very strange thing that Apple was going to do this. Their whole thing was to be the super privacy advocate. So letting the government scan your phone would be the opposite of that. And they seem to have finally figured that out.
Yeah, they seem to finally figure it out. But of course, knowing it is true that things like Facebook, Dropbox, and Google already do this. And we know that Apple does it too on iCloud. Yeah. The big problem has been happening. It's happening on the device rather than in the cloud.
Well, I think most people, when they take a picture on their phone, they think nobody's seeing it except who they want to see it. And even with an Android or something, it's true. You don't put it up in the cloud and you figure nobody's going to see it.
Yeah.
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 All right. And then we get to the all important one that titles the episode. Alan has figured out what's going on with Trump supporters. And I would sure like to know.
Well, I don't think I have an answer exactly, but I do have a study here written by Liliana Mason, Julie Ronsky, and John Kane, 3 academics, titled Activating Animus, the Uniquely Social Roots of Trump Support. And this is a far more intelligent take on what's happening with Trump support in America, far more intelligent than the many news pieces that we had to read over the past 4 years in which a journalist would fly out to flyover country, hang out in a diner for a couple of hours, interview a handful of people, come home and then write an article for the coastal elites. And in this study, they basically took advantage of an ongoing longitudinal survey that started long before Trump became a major political figure, starting in 2011. And this study looked at people's attitudes towards what is termed out groups. And this is where the description of this study gets a little bit more complicated. What they did was, or what this original survey did in 2011, was using online survey platforms. They interviewed thousands of people, or they provided a questionnaire to thousands of Americans, asking them questions pertinent to their attitudes towards, and let me just find the complete list here. Actually, let me just read a quote. Respondents were asked to indicate their feelings toward 4 Democratic aligned social groups in 2011: African Americans, Hispanics, Muslims, gays, and lesbians. Respondents also indicated their feelings toward 2 Republican aligned social groups in 2011, whites and Christians. And what they found was that the respondents' attitudes towards these different groups was highly predictive of their support or lack of support for Trump. And what they found is that people who ended up supporting Trump and were Republican linked had very high animosity levels towards all those Democratic linked groups: African Americans, Hispanics, Muslims, and gays and lesbians.
So they're bigots, just what we all thought they were.
Well, this is what it's coming down to, exactly. While supporters of Democrats, i.e. not Trump supporters, did not show any animus towards whites and Christians, regardless of their own religious and racial identity.
Yeah.
So that's really what it comes down to. I mean, it's a very lengthy explanation to a very simple conclusion. Is as one of the authors, or as the authors write in their paper, and I'll quote a long section here. This research reveals a wellspring of animus against marginalized groups in the United States that can be harnessed and activated for political gain. Trump's unique ability to do so is not the only cause for normative concern. Instead, we should take note that these attitudes exist across both parties and among nonpartisans, though they may remain relatively latent when when leaders and parties draw attention elsewhere. The right leader can activate these attitudes and fold them into voters' political judgments. Should America wish to become a fully multiracial democracy, it will need to reconcile with these hostile attitudes themselves.
Yeah.
So that's really what it comes down to, is that
we're
it's
all
essentially
doomed.
Racism and animus towards what is termed in political science circles outgroups, and that people had these beliefs long before Trump was elected, and that Trump has simply found a way to harness these beliefs and has folded that into the Republican Party today.
So I think it is exactly what we most feared. It is the rise of the Nazis and Hitler in America, just like it was in the 30s in Germany.
Well, yes, and it's a relatively small, well, I don't know how small a group it is, but it is
of America,
a group.
apparently.
Pardon?
30% of America, I think.
Yes. And it is a group that has come to dominate the Republican Party. And at one point, people were calling this the alt-right or what have you, but you don't really hear that term much anymore because it's been mainstreamed into the Republican Party's identity.
Yep. The extremists are now people like Cheney, who oppose this.
Yes. And what people often forget about that the American two-party system is that the two parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, are really coalitions.
Yeah.
And that these coalitions are composed of different groups that are perhaps generally aligned on the liberal to conservative spectrum, but each of these groups has their own special interest, so to speak, and that special interest may or may not really appeal to or fully appeal to or animate the other members of the coalition within the party. But, you know, if you get enough momentum behind a certain idea, it can still come to dominate a party. And because party identity has become such an important part of one's ideological identity and cultural identity in America also, people tend to go along with it just because, well, that's what everyone else in the party is doing.
Well, I think this helps explain another issue, which has sort of surprised me, which is the right just had a massive victory in Texas. They've ended abortion there, essentially. And Fox News is totally ignoring it. And I think that's the point. The same reason why the Republican Party has no platform anymore. The Trump voters don't care about policy at all. And they are not conservative at all. All they care about is hating minorities, which is the only thing Tucker Carlson ever pushes on his show. So the actual triumph of right-wing policy is of no importance to them. And in fact, will probably do them more harm than good because their supporters aren't really on board with that. They're just here for the bigotry. And all this policy stuff is like not helping.
Well, the part of the survey was looking at people's attitudes towards other Republican figures. And it turns out that many of these Trump supporters are not really supporters of Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or other traditional Republican Party figures.
Yeah.
It's really about Trump. And now from there, it's come to, you know, there's been this activation within the Republican Party as a whole, but it's not really support of any more specific other Republican candidates or party figures.
No, I mean, that's a huge issue. That's what happened to Kevin McCarthy and Lindsey Graham. They both tried to break away from Trump, and then they discovered that the Trump supporters will not follow any other Republican. And the only thing Republicans can do is wholly embrace Trump or abandon all hope of power for the next couple of decades, because Trump is it. And that's why Trump raised a bunch of money and blocked the Republican Party from using his name on their fundraising, because funding Trump is completely different than funding the Republican Party.
And I was just gonna say, in a way that can be good, because at least that way we're not gonna get stuck with Pence, which I was worried about. And now they're all mad at Pence. So
but yeah, Pence is over. I mean, they wanted to hang Pence, and they haven't really moved much from that position. Yeah, no, Pence is toast. Yeah, well, we're living in so far we're right on track with 1930s Germany, and they're now embracing violence. They're going to have another march on Washington in a few weeks. They're already talking about planning more violence. So far, I see us going around the drain just like Germany for the same reason. Anyway, I got one about ransomware. It's on Twitter. This guy runs a company that helps people find their keys for ransomware and publishes free open source solutions and contacts companies. And people asked, how did you find out about all these criminals that have ransomware people? And he said, a real simple way. I opened up a Jabber account asking criminals to please talk to me about what they're doing. And it turns out that the criminals are split into factions and they hate each other and they betray each other, and they're quite happy to rat out one another. So they're telling me about what the other criminals are doing. So now he knows who's getting ransomware before the ransom notes come in, and he can contact the company and warn them. And sometimes they'll even like leak the keys so you can decrypt the other guy's ransomware and stuff. This is what a lot of Brian Krebs stories are about too. One group of criminals betraying another group of criminals. So anyway, that's working. It kind of reminds me a few years back when a company got hit by DDoS. I think it was GitHub. And they went on Twitter and said, oh, gee, guys, will you just knock it off? And they stopped and they said, we found a new defense. If you just ask people, will you please knock it off? Sometimes that works. So anyway, that's a fun one. And then Liz has got, yes, TikTokers.
Yeah, so for anybody that isn't aware, Texas passed a new extremely restrictive abortion law stating that people are not allowed to get abortions after 6 weeks, which is pretty crazy because most people aren't going to know they're pregnant before 6 weeks. So they're essentially precluding anyone who can't afford to leave the state from getting an abortion. And because of that, they have also set up a really bizarre system where the state isn't enforcing this law. They set up a website where they're encouraging people to turn in folks who have either gotten an abortion or abortion providers. And what could go wrong? Well, you know, it may surprise folks to learn that there are a lot of people that are not very cool with this new law because they realize the horrific cultural and social implications of it. And so they have been flooding this website with spam, and it was done in a really stupid way where you fill out a web form and it also gives you the opportunity to upload images as part of your evidence, which is bizarre because essentially the way this law sounds is that they've set it up like so that citizens sue each other in a civil suit, and if you win you get $10,000. Yep. So, you know, one thing that occurred to me is, so basically some guy could rape a woman, get her pregnant, and then sue her for getting an abortion and win.
Well, there's already an online forum where they're discussing exactly that.
Sort of insane.
No, there's already an online forum where men who have gotten women pregnant are now figuring out how to turn her in for getting an abortion and cash in on it too.
Awesome. So at least some people are fighting back against this in a way that they are completely and totally abusing the site where you're supposed to report people for this, and just uploading sort of hilarious spam to it, where there was one person that accused the governor of getting like 700 abortions. And they've been uploading like Shrek porn to the image section and stuff like that, which, I mean, it's just terrible that people are abusing this website in a way that it was not designed to be used.
Yeah. What's even more terrible is that in a way this site sort of circumvents the police, and the police, you know, aren't too keen on that as well. And so these criminals who are going out and defacing the site, they can pretty much do it with immunity because the police aren't going to go after them. It's terrible.
That's a real shame. That's a real shame. It would be terrible if people just continued to do that, therefore rendering it completely useless.
Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where they blocked any IP not from Texas, and you know, that's good for them because, you know, you don't want people like knowing about VPNs or going on to like the cloud and creating a server in Texas and using that IP, or going through, you know, people in Texas who have IPs and creating proxy servers through them. You don't want people learning about that.
No.
And exploiting that. So
you definitely don't want people starting a whole open source project where they have shared their Python scripts and iOS shortcuts in order to repeatedly hammer that site with more spam and not get banned.
Well, you folks are definitely like into the positive public service messages today.
Yeah,
we live and remember everything. Remember, everything is bigger in Texas. So if you can do all those things in Texas, it'll be bigger.
There's that. Yeah. All right. Well, Kaitlyn can create disinformation for $15.
Yeah. So how much is it? So, okay. The rest of the world.org. I never heard of this site before, but they have an article written by Victoria Elliott talking about how there was this campaign in Kenya called the Building Bridges Initiative. And it's being challenged by the courts or something. I don't have any idea what's going on in Kenya. I just know that's where all the lions and tigers are, and it's a fun place. But anyway, so there's these people supporting the Building Bridges initiative, and they wanted to create a disinformation campaign. And the Mozilla Foundation started tracking this campaign. So they noticed something odd was going on, and they started tracking it and gathering data. And they started talking to people. And it turns out that the people working on these disinformation campaigns are being paid about $15 a day. And they're saying, well, great, in Kenya and other parts of the world where money can be scarce, $15 a day is a godsend, but they don't know where the money's coming from. It's all like dark money. I mean, it's really shady. But it goes to show just how cheap it is to create a disinformation campaign. You don't have to spend millions of dollars and hire these experts. You can go to third world countries, spend a few $100s and get a whole bunch of people all day tweeting about how vaccines are gonna cause 5G or something. It's
Yep. It used to be Mechanical Turk you went to for that.
Yep.
All right. And Irvin's got Cloudflare's latest server.
So Cloudflare is doing some upgrades to their hardware, and this blog post is all about why they chose to go with AMD yet again over Intel. It all comes down to power usage. They're looking for things that can provide the power they need without using too much electricity.
It's also ARM, right?
This is not ARM. This is all about AMD.
Oh, okay.
The AMD chip 1, hands down in their point of view of how much electricity it's pulling in to produce the workload that they were testing.
Yeah, power efficiency, which I thought was going to push everyone towards ARM, but I guess not yet.
I guess not yet, because Cloudflare is going AMD yet again. There's some RAM upgrades, there's some disk drive changes. It's all there. At the very bottom of the thing, there's a chart that they have as they tried different loads and noticed that the AMD chip, even with throwing it more work, it didn't use more power.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, this is really useful for hardware-oriented types. Shows all the latest hardware improvements.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right. And Alan has got online hostility. There's online hostility?
There's online hostility in droves. Another academic paper from Alexander Bohr, Michael Bang-Peterson, 2 professors, titled "The Psychology of Online Political Hostility, a Comprehensive Cross-National Test of the Mismatch Hypothesis." And another convoluted, rather involved study. What it comes down to is this: the authors looked at people's behavior in the US and Denmark, and their hypothesis was that people would behave differently online than in face-to-face interactions. This is what's been said for decades now, is that something about the internet makes people behave worse, and that otherwise civil people become horrible human beings online. And what the authors found is that that's not actually the case, although they expected that to be the case. It's not the fact that the anonymity of the internet allows people to become more aggressive and more contemptible. Instead, they found that these people who are so awful online are also awful in person.
I wondered that because of the rise of all the Karen videos, of all these people behaving horribly in real life. I wonder if it's just that we weren't aware of how bad they were in real life before.
That's right. And what they do acknowledge is that the internet certainly makes this more visible. But based on the survey questions that they posed to participants in both the US and Denmark, these are basically self-reported. They determined that people who score highly on just the jerk index, if you will, tend to be poorly behaved in both online and face-to-face settings.
And I'm sure they self-report that they're being completely reasonable and all the problems are other people's fault.
Yes, along those lines. And so what they say also, and this has political consequences too, and I'll just quote here from their abstract. They say that we find that online political hostility reflects the behavior of individuals predisposed to be hostile in all, including offline context. Yet because their behavior is more likely to be witnessed on public online platforms, these are perceived to induce more hostility.
And I think what happens is that the most extreme voices get amplified.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And it's also a personality trait they find in that this aggression, quote, is not an accident triggered by unfortunate circumstances, but a strategy that they, the angry jerk people, employ to get what they want, including a feeling of status and dominance in online networks.
And it's apparently. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's not just that it's amplified because they're loud. It's oftentimes amplified on purpose through campaigns. So there's oftentimes there's a strategic element to getting things like white nationalist talking points out on like social media and stuff, where you would never, see them if you're just walking down the street. But because the white nationalists know they can reach so many people, there is an effort there. It's not just happenstance that you just see a bunch of racists online. I mean, there's a will behind it.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with social acceptance. I mean, that's why before Trump, it seemed like there were very few white nationalists in America, but once it became socially acceptable to admit what you really think, it became clear that there were a ton of them.
I mean, I think that's a very California attitude. In California, we don't deal with a whole bunch of white nationalists. I mean, they're out there, but they're in small numbers in the middle of the boondocks, and we don't.
Apparently not.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. No. I mean, you're not going to find a whole bunch of KKK members in the middle of San Francisco. I mean,
actually, the KKK was big in Richmond, right near San Francisco.
Right.
I mean, they're here. They're just.
Like, I mean, they're here, but it's not a big part of our culture. It's something we very much shun. There are parts of the country though where the KKK is, just out there and just about, they're not, everyone knows it. And it's just there's a bit of a culture shock between what we sort of view as normal here and sort of weird, bigots on the outskirts of our society versus what's considered normal in places like Alabama and Georgia, where, it can be very frightening to see, the bigotry on display.
Well, it's suppressed here. They're like gay people in the closet. I mean, my friends who talked to blue collar workers in San Francisco said all through the Obama years, they're completely racist right here. It's just that they can't say so openly because there's a social sanction.
Thank goodness for that social sanction. On the one hand, I don't like the fact that these social sanctions hide these bigots, because it is a problem and it's very easy to ignore if they can't say that they're bigots. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it's not something to be proud of. It really is something we need to sort of address as a society and try to figure out how to get rid of these people.
That would be nice, but I think the whole world's been struggling with it for centuries and nobody has much of a good cure. Anyway, all right. And so this is this Juniper story that got a lot of attention. A Bloomberg investigation, not done by anybody else, has discovered that a whole lot of things we suspected were exactly true. Juniper was hacked in 2015, which has been reported by other people and is apparently true, but nobody really knew how it happened. And what they said is, in the first place, the elliptic curve random number generator that Microsoft reported might have been backdoored by the NSA was really backdoored by the NSA, and the Chinese hacked into Juniper's server to change the seed, the number from which all the random numbers are created, in order to poison the random number generator so they could predict the random numbers. And therefore, the government's backdoor that they put in encryption was exploited by China so they could break in encryption, which is a very nice story and reinforces a whole lot of things that a lot of us have suspected. But the problem is, this is just a Bloomberg investigation. And a few years ago, Bloomberg did the same thing. They claimed that there were secret hidden chips in the iPhones and the Cisco routers that the Chinese put in there. that were spying on everybody, and it was 100% false. Everybody spent the next several months completely proving it wrong. And Bloomberg said, we're standing by what we said. We're going to have an internal investigation, which they never had, and they never had any reports of. So somebody at Bloomberg is hell-bent on manufacturing false security crises and blaming China for them for some reason. And so the problem is, this would be nice if it's true, but this is a very impeached source on this topic. And I don't know what's going on at Bloomberg. Maybe it's Michael Bloomberg himself is convinced that starting a war with China would benefit him economically or something. But anyway, it's interesting. If there's actually any evidence or proof of this stuff, it might be significant, but I'm very suspicious. Anyway, it is important if true. I do not know how it could possibly be verified by a third party, though. There's an internal Bloomberg investigation, just like the last one, that was 100% categorically false. Anyway, then Elizabeth has got Lyft.
Yeah, so there was an interesting article in SF Gate a couple days ago about how there are wildfires happening in Lake Tahoe right now, in South Lake Tahoe, and they published a story showing, and they showed screenshots of this, saying that it was costing $1,500 for a Lyft XL, which is basically like an SUV where you can take 4 or more people. And in their screenshot, the regular rides were costing $400, which is pretty wild. And then they eventually turned off their surge pricing to get the price down to a more reasonable, normal $200 to take the same trip, because it is a long trip. And Uber didn't have any rides available at all. And I'm kind of torn on this, because on one hand, yeah, I get it. That's pretty crazy, and you can't be gouging people in a crisis or emergency situation. On the other hand, these drivers are really risking their health and and their vehicles to evacuate people. So I'm not entirely convinced that they shouldn't get more money for doing that. Literal hazard pay.
I mean, what could be more American than whatever the market will bear? You raise the price, right, as long as people are willing to pay it.
Right. Or why didn't Lyft give a bonus to the driver rather than making the customer pay the extra?
Right.
Well, now you're just being communist. But,
yeah, well, sure. But I mean, if it is a definitely a boost for their company if they're the only ones offering that have rides available, and they're charging that much money to get them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's interesting to hear about. It certainly gives them bad press to appear to be benefiting from a disaster, but that's kind of the whole point of surge pricing.
Right. And if you get an evacuation order and you have the means, get out. Not everybody has the means to get out, but if you're able to, don't wait around to see if it gets worse.
Yep. All right. And Kaitlyn has NASA upgrading the DSN.
Yes, so more DSN upgrades have been going on, thankfully. So the website here, Hindu, I cannot read this. I can't read the name of this.
Hindustan Times.
Hindustan Times, I guess.
Somewhere in India, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so they have an article here by HT Tech. But it's just going over that the DSN is still getting a lot of big upgrades here on the ground. In particular, they just installed the Deep Space Station 56, which is 34 meters wide antenna and that's going in Madrid. That went into Madrid, and then they also updated the DSN 43 antenna, which is like a 70-meter dish, I believe. So things are really, being progressed in terms of what's going on with the DSN linkages here on Earth. And the reason I bring this up is because it's looking like the DSN is going to be sort of like the de facto network in the future. Like once we move on from the internet, we're probably going to be using technology from the DSN because the internet was, of course, designed strictly for Earth. And as we're sort of moving as a society into places beyond, like I was recently talking about building moon bases out of regolith, we're going to be doing a lot of our communications and networking over the DSN. And so it's good that's being updated. And by the way, this is actually how the internet started. It was not created as a public service, like we're just going to have the internet one day. It started off as ARPANET, which was a linkage for government only. And just one day, some senators, including Al Gore, decided that we should open it up to the public, and that's how we got our internet. And I think the same is going to happen one day for the DSN. It's going to be opened up to everyone. But yeah, it's just good that it's getting updated and it's going strong. And it's also a good case of international cooperation because, as many of you probably already know, the DSN stations are located on Earth at 120 degrees apart. So you always get sort of a communication at any time, regardless of the time of day. And so in order to do that, we have our main DSN stations are in Goldstone, California, Madrid, Spain, and somewhere in Australia. And I always forget the name in Australia. But the three countries work together to communicate deep space communications.
Oh, good. All right. And then we got Irvin with a cable bill for 10.
You should always be checking your bills. This old guy did not check his bill and was getting billed for some naughty stuff. And Spectrum was just labeling it as 10. Didn't realize what that was until he started asking questions, and Spectrum said, "Oh, you should have told us when you first saw it in the bill, but TEN doesn't really bring any signs of like, what is this? Seems very innocuous," which was the whole point. Even though there is a law that passed that said that all ISPs should be more clear in their billing, they still find ways around that and charge you extra for things you did not ask for.
Yeah, that's called slamming. Slam you into a service you didn't ask for and then bill you for it. Phone company's been doing it forever.
Yep. So keep an eye on your bills.
And 10 is the erotic networks.
Yes.
Yep. All right. And Alan has got the leaving your cell phone on the airplane.
Some months ago, I had a story about how the U.S. military has been testing GPS spoofing and how that has been screwing up commercial flights, especially in Western U.S.
Right.
To the point that there have been a few not near accidents, but where navigation of planes was really seriously thrown off. And now the IEEE and their publication, the Spectrum, have an exclusive story on how the FAA is now conducting investigations into how perhaps leaving your cell phone on can actually improve security and improve navigation on flights. Now, this is not for commercial flights. This testing currently is being done on only private light aircraft. But the idea is that since GPS spoofing is a real thing, it's not only practiced by the US military, but the technology is available on AliExpress for anyone who wants to pay about $30 and is willing to potentially get in trouble. The idea is that by using the cell phone, it's possible to provide a sanity check to GPS information. It is very easy to spoof GPS information because the signals from the GPS satellites are so weak. And so if you instead install an app, which is what's going on here, then that app can basically perform some triangulation based on distance from cell phone towers. And so this is a study being funded by the FAA, and it's being run by the MITRE Corporation, which of course is a big name in the cybersecurity world too. But they also have a Center for Advanced Aviation Systems Development. And it's a very straightforward, simple test where they're going to different locations over different terrains, flying over different terrains, and flying at different altitudes, running this app and using the cell phone tower data to verify the GPS data. And so this is probably not going to be applied in a commercial context. It's unlikely that people will be encouraged to turn their phones on while flying, but for smaller private pilots and maybe even pilots in commercial flights in the future, it will be possible to use perhaps a cell phone app as a sanity check to the GPS.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So just as an addendum, a lot of people already know that there's an airplane mode on their phones. And I think there's a common misconception about why that airplane mode exists. So a lot of people think that the airplane mode, and I thought this for a long time too, was to prevent the radio transmissions from the phone to interfere with the avionics on the aircraft. And that's actually not why it exists. The avionics on the aircraft are not going to be affected by your cell phone transmissions. The reason the airplane mode exists is because when you are flying up in the air, you basically have a direct line of sight to a whole bunch of cell phone towers on the ground, and you're moving at like 200, 300 kilometers per hour. And the cell phone towers just cannot handle that. And so it's really protection more of the ground equipment, the cell phone towers, stuff like that. And to make things even more annoying is that the modern cell phone towers could absolutely handle cell phones in the air, but the earlier ones just couldn't, because they just weren't advanced enough to figure out what was going on when you had cell signals suddenly flying by at like 200 kilometers per hour. But yeah, I mean, that's why it exists. So there's nothing, if you do end up using cellular transmissions in an aircraft, it's not going to like cause the airplane to crash or mess up the communications or the VFO stuff. I mean, you're all good.
It does airplane mode does help you conserve battery though, also, because it's not going to be continually trying to connect to those towers.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, I found an article from CrowdStrike talking about malware analysis, and they say it's now frequent in security operations centers that they need a malware analyst there, and they need to be able to do open source intelligence and figure out what the malware is doing, which I'm glad to see, because when I started teaching malware analysis a few years ago, it was seen as sort of an esoteric side activity that very few students would actually need to get a job. But now I'm hearing from recruiters, they really want people to do malware analysis. So that's good. We've been teaching it for a while, and I really like it. It's sort of fun and technical. You get into the guts of Windows and stuff, but I feel better about teaching it to students now that I know they can really get a job with it.
Cabrillo has been telling me no, that I can't make that type of class because it's too far out.
I know, and that was true apparently like 5 or 10 years ago, but not anymore.
Yeah, these people that make these broad pronunciations about what we can and can't teach are so out of touch. They just don't stay current to the industry at all, but still continue to make these issue these edicts,
Mm-hmm.
Colleges have a huge problem with being way behind, like 10 or more years behind industry in this field. It's ridiculous. That's why I remember one thing that will really ruin your life in college is when you go to DEF CON or participate in CTFs and find out how your material is so far behind what industry people expect you to know.
Yeah, it'd be cool if, there were some new and visionary college that recognized the fact that we were in the 21st century and, encouraged their instructors to stay current and then teach those current topics to their students to better position them in the job market. But I know that's a crazy and radical thing to say.
Well, that's SANS. But SANS, you have to be working full-time in the field and teach on the side, which I think is what you'd have to do because it's a lot of work to stay current. And you can't really expect like an average community college instructor to stay current. They don't have time for training. There are no resources for training and stuff. It's
yeah, and I think that's part of the broken model. I mean, and it isn't even just colleges, some of our bigger universities who don't have as much of an excuse not to invest in professional development for their instructors, but the system is just so broken and top heavy and profit driven now that that's kind of the quality of instruction has really been deprioritized at so many schools, and making sure that your faculty have opportunities to stay current, do meaningful research, go to conferences, get continuing education and training, are just really kind of falling by the wayside.
Yeah,
those are foreign concepts, Liz.
I know.
I'm surprised college degrees still have the reputation of being so valuable, and they affect your career so much because increasingly in technical fields, it's not clear to me that college degrees are worth much. But apparently the overall maturity or something is what people value. So you might as well be teaching them Latin or something.
Oddly enough, I think part of it is a status symbol, an easy HR filter. Another part of it is I do think that there are some things that can be useful, and one of them, strangely enough, is writing, because I think that a lot of technical careers are have a much more heavy focus on writing and communication and presentation skills than we often consider or give those roles credit for, I guess I should say, because we oftentimes get so heavily wrapped up in the technical stuff. And one of the other issues that we have is that the longer that I spend in adult technical education, the more I realize that it's a constant push to get college and university administrators to understand that these classes are about obsolete as soon as you publish them. And in technical courses, teachers really need to have the time, bandwidth, and resources to continuously update this stuff as the landscape of the industry is changing. You can't just make a technical course and then let it sit for 20 years and expect it's still going to be relevant like you might be able to with a 19th century English literature course.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is probably partnership with industry, where you have real industry people hiring people and internships and visiting speakers and stuff.
Yeah, and you're making sure that your curricula are informed by
and she's gone.
To the extent that you're teaching.
Oh. Yep. Your internet is cutting away your sentences again.
That'll happen out here in the country. Come on, Elon Musk, get me some Starlink.
That's right. All right. And Liz has got this person who nuked 21 gigs of data. If your internet.
Yes. Yeah, so this credit union employee got fired from her job, and she was working remotely for some credit union in New York State, and they didn't revoke her access for like 2 days. And so she decided she was going to get some revenge and went in and deleted a ton of sensitive data on their shared drive.
But wouldn't it be obvious? Doesn't it record who logged in? I mean, you can't cover your tracks if you're using your own credentials.
Clearly, it does record your track, but also if only she'd been one of Sam's students, because Sam gives the excellent advice, if you're going to go committing computer crimes, don't confess to them on digital media and incriminate yourself. And she did. She texted a friend, they didn't revoke my access, so I deleted the P drive. Generally, and as if that weren't specific enough, then she wrote, I deleted their shared network documents. So, if you are going to go committing computer crimes, don't incriminate yourself. But I thought it was one of the kind of quotes that from the story that stood out was from a guy at the FBI who said her petty revenge not only created a huge security risk for the bank, but also customers depending on paperwork and approvals to pay for their homes, which is true. But my main issue was the first part of that sentence. I don't think she created the big security risk for the bank. I think that the bank did, and that the third-party firm that they had contracted with to revoke the employee credentials created a huge security risk. And I see this a lot with companies. They don't pay much attention to their onboarding and offboarding procedures, and that causes a ton of problems. And then a lot of times, and this has even happened at companies where, for example, one company I worked at that shall not be named would revoke creds to like corporate emails and Slack and stuff like that. But after you parted company with this company, you still had access to all of the AWS logins. What could go wrong? To all of the code repos. What could go wrong? Stuff like that, where you basically could wreak havoc, but they don't pay any attention to that stuff.
Well, that's the big issue these days of sprawl. You're sprawled over all these services, and you don't even really know how many services you're using or where your stuff is.
Yeah, and you'll have managers that have you do idiotic stuff. Like I was at another organization that will not be named, and the CTO told me to set up organizational resource using my own private phone number for 2FA.
Oh, there you go.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, I know that happened at the college. They bought a bunch of iPads, and a student configured them to go to that student's iCloud, and then they left. And now we can't use them. Like, wait, what?
I know, and we tried a million different things to get those unlocked, including talking to Apple. And they said, oh, sure, we can do that for you as long as you have the receipts. And we're like, have the receipts? I don't know if there ever was one.
Yep. Yeah, I actually got in one of them by getting a receipt and taking it to the Apple store. Yeah, well.
The moral of the story is that that bank should have hired us.
Well, yeah, I mean, remember, this was my job when I worked at my escrow agency. They would call me and say, we're about to fire this person. I didn't put it that way. And they would make them take a long walk to the back room to get fired. But before that happened, they would tell me to freeze their account.
Right.
Which is what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would fire you. And then they would have an executive walk with you to your desk and get a box and stick all your stuff in the box and make sure you're not taking anything you shouldn't take, and then shove you out the door, watching to make sure you didn't do anything bad. Yeah. Well, but it was simpler then. There weren't any cloud services, so we didn't have the issue that Liz was talking about. Anyway, well, that's it for this one. And being Friday, I think we'll be back on Tuesday.